I'm going to start with a rabbit story, which is called Moon Rabbit, and it's by Natalie Russell. So this is what the book looks like. So I shall start at the beginning. Little Rabbit liked living in the city. She had her own place to stay, her favourite cafe, and so many things to see and do. But at night, when everything was quiet and Little Rabbit was all alone, she would look up at the moon and wonder if there was someone out there. Someone she could play with, laugh with and have fun with. Someone just like her. It would be nice to meet another little rabbit, she thought. When the city became very busy, Little Rabbit would go to the park to read her book. And one day, as Little Rabbit read, she heard the most beautiful music floating on the air. She lay back and listened. The park was so peaceful and the sun was so warm that Little Rabbit's eyes began to close, and very soon she was fast asleep. And when Little Rabbit woke up, the sun had gone and the moon was shining brightly. It was past Little Rabbit's bedtime. But in the distance she could still hear music, and it was the kind of music she liked. So Little Rabbit picked up her book and followed the sound through the trees, and there she saw a rabbit. A brown rabbit who was playing a guitar, making music that made Little Rabbit want to dance. So she stayed for a while. As Brown Rabbit played, Little Rabbit danced. Then Little Rabbit told tales of the city and Brown Rabbit listened. And together they watched the changing moon until the birds sang in the morning sun. And for a while, Little Rabbit forgot about her life back in the city. The two rabbits had picnics in the sunshine and games of hide and seek. They made each other laugh, and Little Rabbit was very happy to have found a new friend. But then, one dark night, Little Rabbit saw the city lights glowing in the distance and suddenly felt sad. The city is so beautiful, she sighed. Brown Rabbit was quiet. How could anything be as beautiful as the moonlit park, he thought. Brown Rabbit didn't like to see his new friend feeling sad, so he played his guitar and danced around Little Rabbit. He even stood on his head, anything to make her laugh or to see her smile. But there was nothing he could do to make her happy. "It's time for me to go home," said Little Rabbit. So early the next morning, Little Rabbit returned to the city. Back to her home, back to her favourite cafe, back to all the things she liked to see and do. And she no longer gazed at the moon and wondered if there was someone out there, another little rabbit just like her. Because she knew that there was, and he was coming to visit the very next day. So that's the rabbit story. The next story I'm going to read is the cat one, which is The Lighthouse Keeper's Cat by Rhonda and David Armitage. So that's what the cover of this one looks like. So this is a slightly longer story, so get yourselves comfy. So the cat in this story is called Hamish. Hamish lived with Mr. and Mrs. Grinling in a little white cottage on the cliffs. Mr. Grinling was the lighthouse keeper. Some days Hamish went to work with Mr. Grinling. He liked to help in the lighthouse. And when visitors came, Hamish would show them around. "What a magnificent cat," they would exclaim. "Hamish, king of the lighthouse." And some days Hamish worked with Mrs. Grinling. He liked digging in the garden where she planted the seeds. He also liked to help with cooking. "Fish with everything" was Hamish's motto. "Not in a chocolate cake," said Mrs. Grinling firmly. A lot of the time Hamish liked to sleep, and one night he was curled up in his favourite place when he heard Mr. and Mrs. Grinling talking. "They were there again today," said Mr. Grinling, scampering and squeaking. "The inspector of lighthouses is coming next week, and he says the mice might eat the wiring." "What about Hamish?" asked Mrs. Grinling. "He might catch them for you." Mr. Grinling chuckled. "Oh, Hamish? Chase mice? Really? Mrs. G, he's much too plump and well fed." "He might be persuaded if he wasn't quite so well fed," said Mrs. Grinling. "He might chase mice if he didn't have any breakfast before he went to the lighthouse." "You mean starve him?" whispered Mr. Grinling. "Shh, Mrs. G, he'll be upset if he hears you." Hamish was upset, very upset. No breakfast, she'd said. Starve him, he'd said. "Well, my quivering ginger whiskers," he thought, "we'll see about that. Nobody starves a lighthouse cat. If they don't love me any more, I'll go somewhere else to live." And early next morning, Hamish left home. As he made his way to the village, he met all kinds of strange creatures. Some wanted to chase him, and some wanted to play. He was delighted when he smelt a house. Fish," sniffed Hamish. "Probably shark." "Look, Mum," called a little boy, "there's an enormous cat at our door. I think he's hungry. Can we feed him?" Hamish liked the breakfast they gave him. He liked the big children. They played hide and seek and chased the mouse with him. He didn't like the baby. It rolled on him and squashed his ears. "Not bad though," thought Hamish, as he jumped up to sleep beside the stove. "I like this house. I think I'll stay." "What's this?" exclaimed the mother. "A cat that jumps on benches? A scavenging cat? Not in this house. Scat cat," she said. "You go." And she shut the door behind him. "Well, my quivering ginger whiskers," thought Hamish. "We'll see about that. Nobody shouts at this lighthouse cat." And he stalked off down the road. A tabby kitten dropped on him from a tree. "Play with me and you can share my dinner." Hamish liked the dinner so much that he forgot to share. The kitten swung on his tail. "Play with me and you can sleep in my bed." Hamish slept in the bed, but he was so large there was no room for the kitten. "Who's your ginger friend?" asked the old man. The kitten hissed at Hamish. He wasn't a friend. He didn't share. But Hamish wanted to stay. He liked the dinner and he liked the bed. "I'll show them how clever I am," he thought. "I'll make them look at me." But the old man and the kitten took no notice. They snored and purred together. "Well, my quivering ginger whiskers," Hamish glared. "We'll see about that. Nobody ignores a lighthouse cat." But he didn't stay grumpy for long. The sun warmed his orange whiskers and the smell of a warm mouse tickled his nose. It was nearly dark when Hamish found the yard. He looked around. This is no place for a lighthouse cat. Probably mice, possibly rats, maybe cats. And they were not pleased to see Hamish. "Who invited you?" snarled a tattered grey cat. "This is our place. We don't like strangers," hissed the one-eyed black. "Skedaddle, mush. Beat it. You don't belong here." Hamish skedaddled right to the top of the tallest tree. "Well, my quivering ginger whiskers," he puffed, "we'll see about that. Nobody snarls at the lighthouse cat." He peered over the branches. The cat's eyes gleamed below. "Perhaps I'll just stay here for a while," thought Hamish. The lights of the village blinked around him. Far away another light flashed. Hamish sat up. My lighthouse. He thought about Mr. and Mrs. Grinling. He thought about the little white cottage. The leaves of the trees rustled and the tree began to sway. "It's time to go home," thought Hamish. He looked down the tree again. It was too dark to see the ground any more. "I don't like going down," thought Hamish. "I can't go down. I want to go home." He yowled and he yowled, but nobody heard him. And then the thunder rumbled and the rain poured down. He yowled again, but still nobody heard him. And after a while the rain stopped and a soggy, sad ginger cat went to sleep. Mrs. Grinling heard the thunder too. "Oh, my poor Hamish," she cried to Mr. Grinling. "Where is he? He'll be so frightened." There, there, my dear, soothed Mr. Grinling. You know our Hamish. He's a clever cat. He'll be snug and warm, or I'll eat my hat. Next morning, Mrs. Grinling was up very early. There was no sign of Hamish. I'm going out to search for him, she said to Mr. Grinling. He might be hurt. But before she left, she did some cooking, and then she set off for the village on her bike. Round and up and down she cycled. Every now and then she would stop and take something out of her basket. 3 seagulls arrived at a very tall tree near the village. They flew round it squawking. What a caterwauling, exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. What had they seen in that tree? 3 seagulls woke Hamish with their noise. He meowed. Hamish, called Mrs. Grinling. He looked down. His whiskers quivered. I know that smell. His nose nearly fell off his face. It was his favourite dinner, stargazy pie. Mrs. Grinling had cooked it specially. They weren't going to starve him after all. He meowed and meowed. You foolish cat, said Mrs. Grinling fondly. I'll come up and get you. She put the stargazy pie in the basket and climbed to the top of the tree. And Hamish was so excited that he fell onto the pie, and Mrs. Grinling lowered the basket to the ground. Mrs. Grinling was delighted to see Hamish home again. Just in time too, he said. Please, Hamish, I need your help. If Mrs. Grinling cooks you another stargazy pie, could you persuade the mice to find a new home? Hamish meowed.